Rajiv, welcome to Stories in AI. So glad to have you here.
Thanks, Ganesh. A pleasure to be here and look forward to our discussion.
Now, I was looking forward for this for almost a year now, so hey, thank you for taking time in your busy schedule. Why don't you kick us off with your story and your background? Both, how did you get into tech and how did you get into healthcare? And give us your story.
Sure. So, mechanical engineering as an undergraduate degree, and then after that, got a master's in computer science, and then spent a number of years in the Silicon Valley with tech startups, being a part of several small and larger tech companies in the Bay Area, and then just happened to stumble into healthcare more from a tech perspective in the early 2000s, just as companies were looking to leverage internet-based technologies at scale and start to think about how would you kind of extend the reach of healthcare companies, which had been doing a great job in the bricks and mortar world, to really being more digital and more online and leverage some of the playbooks of big tech. And so it was right at the intersection of that. And then one thing led to the other. And, 20 years later, still in healthcare, still attempting to solve some of the similar problems, but optimistic about kind of what's in front of us.
That is awesome. And by the way, I'm an undergrad in mechanical engineering too, and I flunked my master's in computer science. I didn't really finish it, so I dropped out.
Well,
But
you
it's
got
interesting you say.
around that. So,
No, I know, right? So, but I did start in computers and programming too, and it's fascinating. And I like to say, right, you were one of the early, cool kids who actually thought healthcare was cool, and there's a huge opportunity to make a difference, and went in. Nowadays, it's the next cool thing for people to hang out. So all the cool kids now, I blanketly say, hang out in healthcare. So do I. So it's pretty fascinating. Thanks for that background. And then for the audience who haven't actually, there's a lot more detail you go into on your background in your book, You and AI, that we published, I think last year or the year before. It's
last year.
fascinating. So yeah, right. So no, it's awesome. So in one thing you talk about in the book as well, and I want to just start off with that question, right? You mentioned this notion of we live in an exponential age, right? We live in a where there's all these the technology adoption curves are not linear anymore, right? And the progress is not linear anymore. Explore that for me a little bit. What is the exponential age?
Yeah, I think for the tech audiences in your viewers there, Ganesh, I think they'll all sort of remember the Moore's law that famously postulated back in the early 70s, that the price performance of semiconductors and chips on motherboards is going to double at roughly price performance in roughly 18 months
Every
or
18
so.
months, yeah.
Right. So, and that, famously encapsulated as Moore's law, has largely held true in the semiconductor, business for the last, 40, plus years. Now, I think if you map other technologies like artificial intelligence or blockchain or smartphones for that matter, things like nanotechnology and other things, they all have a similar sort of exponential sort of growth trajectory to them, which is that at first they seem small and insignificant, but their maturity, their capability, their ability to perform at scale seems to roughly mirror sort of Moore's law of doubling, every year to 18 months.
Yep.
So that the good news there then is that for us as consumers of any, sort of industry, but in particular in healthcare, could take some sense of optimism from the fact that these technologies will continue to grow and mature and will give companies and hospitals, doctors, and caregivers and consumers access to a tremendous amount of technology at their fingertips, ultimately to simplify the consumer experience, improve the
Mhm.
lives of consumers, and make our healthcare system, much better, than what it is today. And that's kind of what we're working on at Elevance. But that's kind of broadly why sort of I characterize that era that we're living in as being the exponential era.
Got it. And I think like you made a couple of different and then earlier when we were talking, you were mentioning this too, right? One is the whole linear curve. Doubling is not necessarily linear; it's already exponential if it's doubling every 18 months or 12. And
Right.
then it's hard for people to also fathom the rate of change. You look back and say, yeah, we evolved quite a bit, but think about it like from a I remember that old thing, like, it took 50 years for the telephone to hit like 50 million households. And it
Mhm.
took 3 days for Angry Birds, when that game came out, to actually hit 50 million users. So
Right.
it's the rate of adoption is a whole different curve and so forth too, right? And thanks for, so is the exponential age a characteristic of the rate of change of things around you, or is it or is it a set of technologies that have far more potential or potency than it did 20 years ago, 30 years ago? How
I
would you
think
see that?
Ganesh, a bit of both. I think it's the rate of change. I think is ever increasing, but the perception of the rate of change that we as humans perceive continues to be somewhat linear. That's kind of what's
Hmm.
codified into our DNA, having sort of grown up in the sub-Saharan deserts and deserts and evolving from there. It's We're programmed to think linear, and it's hard for us
Hmm.
to think about concepts and change as having that doubling effect and at growing at a pace that we don't necessarily naturally think about. So that's one for sure.
Yep.
And then there's also the convergence of various technologies. As you know, computing power is just ever increasing, and there's more power, and more computing capacity in our smartphone today than there was perhaps in the supercomputer just a few years ago.
Sure.
And so
Yep.
if you imagine that, right, so more compute power at your fingertips, the cost of storage of information and data is nominally, maybe even close to zero. Imagine all the pictures you send around and all the
Hmm.
ubiquitous storage you have access to on all social media platforms. So
Yep.
the cost of storage, compute capacity is increasing, cost of storage is decreasing. And then there's the capabilities themselves are getting more and more sophisticated. Artificial intelligence can do more. Things like blockchain can do more. Things like the metaverse are coming into view very nicely. So if you take all of these technologies and converge them on a foundation where computing is growing at an ever faster, computing capacity is growing at an ever faster pace, and storage is decreasing at an ever faster pace, then you've got sort of a unique mix that ultimately I think will fundamentally reshape all the industries that we're in. Reshape commerce, reshape retail, financial
Yep.
services, and
Healthcare. Yeah.
of course healthcare.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, and I think I'll add one more dimension to it. Is actually also the technology was also just the playground of an elite few
Mhm.
20 years ago, 30 years ago, right? You have to be like, in computer science, doing research where you have the ability to build the infrastructure, then put the software on it, write code, and so forth. Now it's broadly applicable with the internet. And, so you mentioned blockchain, but the whole notion of now you can tap into more human capital through technology capital to go make that also makes a huge difference. So, you're also kicking off. So this whole series of stories in AI is actually all about inspiring more and more people to get into being a part of this powerful technology curve and the adoption, driving the adoption, getting educated, and contributing to it, because it's our future that we all need to own together. And you're kicking off a series on AI in healthcare. So before we go into AI, talk about healthcare. Is our healthcare system broken?
I don't know that it's broken, Ganesh. I think if you, I think people tend to talk about it negatively, and I think
Yeah,
perhaps that's because we tend to focus on the things that are wrong, but rather
that's
than
good.
taking a more holistic view of it. If you think about it, when people want access to care, regardless of which part of the world you live in, the U.S. is a beacon for innovation, for
Yeah,
creating, finding new forms of care. All the cutting edge research that's happening in cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and all the chronic conditions, drug discovery, the incredible amount of innovation that happens in life sciences. All of that is are all really good things. And what we find is that when one, unfortunately or not, has cancer or any other disease like that, the care that the U.S. system is able to provide is unparalleled, and there's strong evidence to support all of that.
mm-hmm.
But that being said, no system is perfect, right? We need to make access to care more affordable, more equitable, and make it available to more of the population. I think we could all agree that with nearly $4 trillion being spent on healthcare across the country today, that the rate of growth in healthcare perhaps is not sustainable. And if it
Yeah.
keeps growing at that pace, it has impacts to the economy and in impacts to us as individuals in terms of how many people can access care. So I think there are some things to fix in our system, and but I think the broad brush of it is that it works for a vast majority of the country. I think the model of private and public partnerships to improve health and ultimately drive better innovation. I think those are many things that I think are kind of a bright light in our country. With that being said, I think we have to build on the good and make it even better.
No, it's I like the way you frame that thing too, right? I mean, you're right. Everybody loves to appeal to the amygdala complex and focus on the negatives and say, oh, it's broken, completely needs to be transformed and stuff. But the reality is, as you said, the quality of care that this country affords to everybody and provides for everybody as an option is unparalleled. The interconnected nature of the ecosystem, the amount of dollars that's going into research, and the cutting edge nature of it is great. There's definitely an incentive alignment problem, right? For sure. There is the notion, I think you rightly put it, it's the equitable, providing equitable care, affordability, accessibility for everybody, and making sure you're building a larger participatory loop that everybody gets the same quality of care across the spectrum. That's the big opportunity. And I totally agree with that. And then that's where technologies like AI and blockchain comes into play, right? So explain to a peer, and I know this industry is still, in my experience at least, there is a lot of innovation happening, a lot of thought leaders there, but it's still a lot of folks are trying to grab their head around what is this powerful technology called artificial intelligence? Why does it matter to healthcare? And how can you solve all of these problems with AI? So educate this audience as if you're talking to a peer in the industry and talk about like why AI and what is AI for that matter for this context, and how can we use that to solve some of these problems as examples.
Yeah, great question. I think, Ganesh, and I think I like the way you framed it. And to me, artificial intelligence or any technology that does afford scale and efficiency, I think perhaps has a similar story. And to me, that is that ultimately healthcare is about enhancing the human to human interaction, whether it's between a doctor and a patient at a time of need and a time of a critical moment in a person's life, or it's a consumer and a healthcare advocate or a customer service agent that's kind of supporting that interaction. Unlike other industries, the health interactions, whether it's service oriented or it's care oriented, tend to be one of heightened emotion because you're dealing with a health issue for you or a loved one or your family, and that interaction's got to be seamless, frictionless, and delightfully personalized. And we would all agree that that's far from the case today. I mean,
Yep.
I think there are pockets of those interactions, and that we just need to take those pockets and make it ubiquitous. So,
Okay.
how do we do that? Which means that we could either have a unlimited number of physicians and clinical capacity and customer service agents to serve the needs of the population, but then uh, healthcare will be only affordable to the far and few. You
Yep.
know, not every the price point of concierge medicine, for example, is so high that only the few elite
That
can
makes
afford it.
sense.
It's not something that the country in general can afford it. So how do we take that? How do we take personalized service? How do we take a delightfully personalized experience and make it available to everyone in the country? And to do that, what we have to start with is applying technologies like artificial intelligence to automate processes that perhaps do not require that human touch. So, for example, processing of claims, could that be automated? A lot of companies in our industry, have automation rates in the mid 80s or high 80s. Can we crank that up to the mid 90s, and thus freeing up capacity to focus on the human to human interactions? There are lots of things that are routine in terms of questions that consumers have about their bills or about the status of a claim or making an appointment and things like that. All of those things could be automated using capabilities and technologies like artificial intelligence, ultimately to free up enough of the human capacity to focus on the things that matter in the lives of our consumers and our patients. So I think the first form and the most sort of frequent application of AI, I think, is in the automation of tasks that are routine and replicable and repeatable. And then I think, but that's not the end of it. I think
Mm.
what happens is as you're using AI and machine learning and techniques like that to automate the routine tasks, there's an immense amount of data that's available and insights are available in those processes
Mm.
that then can be used towards then personalizing the experiences. So every time a patient is seeing a doctor, why not have all of the insights that are available longitudinally about that patient available to the doc, make
Yep.
sure that the patient is informed about what questions to ask, and then following the visit, and whether it's for a surgery or it's for or an annual wellness visit, that there are digital breadcrumbs kind of leading up to it and following that to facilitate an ongoing engagement between the doctor and the patient. So that really is kind of the power of AI and technologies like that, which is to automate the things that are non-value add, let's say,
Mm.
and ultimately emphasize the human to human interaction in such a way that it amplifies the time and the outcome of those interactions.
No, it's fascinating. I love the way you centered it around what's uniquely core about healthcare as an industry, and about which is the human to human interaction, right? And I think, and I'm CEO of Autonomize, a healthcare oriented AI company, and what we actually talk about is like, look, I mean, healthcare is the largest industry with the largest amount of knowledge workers, and there's a reason for it, right? Because it's not just completely automatable, because you got to empower. What really makes it strong is the human knowledge that makes a process and interaction a lot more richer, right? So you can't just do automate content in there. You got to pair content with context to go drive these decisions. And I love the framing of that, and I think I love that as what you also provided as a roadmap for healthcare innovators to thinking about, how do I actually use this powerful technology to go do it? So focus on the core thing, which is the human to human interaction. If you're a provider, you want to ensure that your clinician or doctors are spending more time with the patients face to face than clicking through an EHR system, right? If you're a payer, like you guys are, you want to make sure your care coordinators are spending less time doing paperwork and processing different medical documentations and prior authorization requests and stuff, and focusing more on care coordination, getting the customer, getting the member to the right care setting at the right time, proactively managing their health, and so forth. Like, this whole opportunity is in front of that. Even we see this even in pharma, for example, and life sciences. Well, I mean, if you look at clinical development, a drug launch process, and the amount of calories being spent on doing the same thing over and over again for clinical trials, coordinating clinical trials, no wonder it takes 10 to 15 years and $2 billion to launch a drug, right? So there's all these pockets of opportunities, and I love the way you really framed it, because I think for every healthcare innovator that's in the audience listening to this, I think it provides that core thing. Like, if there's one thing that's central to healthcare, and I strongly believe in that too, is a human to human interaction. Now you start looking at it and saying, how do I optimize all my energies and dollars into that? What do I need to take off the table so I can reallocate in there, right? And that's where the framework comes in. I love it. I think that's an amazing answer to on that question. Now, one question is like, and you made some examples on like areas, and specifically on the payer side, and we talked about like claim process automation, stuff like that too. What are some of the risks that you see? I mean, there's a lot of talk around like, so AI, on the one hand, we both agree on the fact that it's like, yes, it's artificial intelligence, but it's more powerful when you empower and augment the human in the loop to do something better than they already are really uniquely suited to do, right? But there's still, you're dealing with data, you're dealing with a lot of moving systems, if you will. What are some of the risks that you see in the approach? What should the leaders think about?
It's a good question, Ganesh. So I think first and foremost, I think the AI is only as good as the data that kind of feeds it. And
Yeah.
so, partial data, incomplete data, inequitable data not representative of the broader population, then perhaps we run the risk of automating something at scale and perpetuating something perhaps that was limited by humans making decisions and therefore not ultimately being scalable,
Yep.
to applying tech at scale and perhaps automating something at scale that shouldn't be automated,
Yep.
or is flawed in terms of the approach to the automation. So I
Yep.
think there's a huge risk in terms of not perpetuating the things that are currently suboptimal in our healthcare system by automating them at scale. So before we embark on any initiative, for example, at Elevance, we make sure that the data set that represents the problem we're trying to solve is in fact representative of the reality of the population that we serve.
And you do that by making sure that the experts and folks who understand the data spend time on it, do
Yes,
things without automation and manually to make sure that you have the right ground truth, right?
exactly right, Ganesh. So I think what we've noticed is on average, our AI initiatives, we spend 80% of the time on data prep, data integrity, data quality,
Yep.
data wrangling in general to make sure that the right inputs are available to, to the algorithms that we're developing. And then also the talent that then trains the algorithms and the human capital that works with those algorithms to make sure that techniques like supervised learning and reinforcement learning also similarly account for the human bias that naturally exists, right?
Yep.
So, for instance, if there's only one type of demographic of human resources that are training an algorithm, it's likely that inadvertently you're going to bring in your own perspectives to that, right,
Yep.
wrong, or indifferent.
Yep.
To make it more broadly equitable to the general population, the talent and the workforce itself has to be diverse in order
Fair.
to account for
Implicit bias and things like that,
exactly
right? Yeah.
all those things. And as you know, it's easier said than done. Hiring women in tech and AI is hard. So there's got to be continual efforts to make sure that we're able to get that population. We have a severe underrepresentation of African American talent in engineering. We have a severe underrepresentation of Latinx talent, I think in engineering, and so on and so forth. Several, underrepresented minorities, I think, are generally underrepresented in a more acute level in STEM and in engineering in particular. So there is a risk of us, like a subset, then creating solutions for the many.
Mm.
And in doing that, I think there's a disproportionate onus to make sure we're not sort of perpetuating an implicit or a subconscious bias in that. So the risk there. And then there's also the risk of black boxes making decisions,
Yep.
and having the transparency and explainability around the black box is paramount to making sure that there's trust across the system. Otherwise, I think we run the risk of some of the backlash that big tech has had in sort of some of the social media applications of AI
Yep.
and perpetuating that in healthcare. And I think the bar for us is much higher because we are in the midst of making care decisions, in the midst of serving people at the most vulnerable.
Yep.
So I think all of those things are risks that definitely can be mitigated. But sometimes I think as technologists, we could fall in love with the tech and
Yeah.
ignore the rest of the implications and just run away with it. And that's just a recipe for sort of regrettable decisions down the road. Yeah.
Love it. And I think just to summarize some of the things that you said, like lots of golden nuggets here. I think, look, you started off with this premise, and I love the way you framed it again, right? Which is technology is, or like AI, is a scale factor, right? It's a leverage factor wherein you can say, if you want to do good with AI, you can do a lot of good very immediately. If you make a mistake with AI, you can make a lot of those mistakes almost instantaneously. If you want to do bad with AI, you can also perpetuate the bad, like knowingly, right? And most people, we will all like to believe that they have the right intentions, but then you also have to marry the process and the ingredients with the right intentions. So but that being the premise, I think, you touched upon a few different areas. One is, how do you make sure that you're looking at this from a perspective of like data and human centricity, making sure you're being very conscious of the fact that you could introduce bias in decisions. So how do you really look at it across the value chain, whether it's in the data prep stage or you're checking quality of the data, checking the bias that is implicit in the data, and so forth. And then, I love that part that you talked about, the diversity of the builders themselves. And, we as technologists like to go fast and break things and move on, but you're introducing implicit bias in the system just by having a non-diverse team that is actually leading it. And you're very good call outs on women in tech, colored tech population, all should be huge focus for any innovators who want to do things at scale. And then lastly, I think the black box decisions and having the ability to actually explain decisions, reason across that. Because one thing to look at a picture and say it's a cat or a dog, totally different thing when you're defending a $80 million lawsuit because of a bad care decision, right? So, but then I think the one thing I would add to this, and you said that, and like the technologies go in this fast, this pace, but what happens in the real world is slightly different. I think I think I had Dheeraj Pandey on the show, and he was the one who coined this thing about like AI. If you really think about it, the other side of the coin of AI is design, really good intentional design, right? How do you really, and so it goes with how do I drive adoption to the particular product or the project that we're building? How do you make sure that the experience is in a manner that the users feel the trust that is actually, they feel a trusted relationship to go do it. So all of that you can actually go package into as design. So technology is more than just the technology, and AI is more than just like having the smartest machine learning algorithm. On that note, right? Let's dive a little deep on your Elevance and Anthem and now Elevance experience. You led a pretty massive digital transformation across this, historic company, if you will, right? And the results are stunning, and it's reflective in your earnings reports and everywhere as well. Talk a little bit about like what was that journey about, like, and how, and you probably have touched a lot of that thing in there. And what was the toughest part of that journey, and where are you in that journey right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for the compliments on the work so far. The journey is nowhere complete, Ganesh. I think we've come a long way, and in some ways, so AI and the use of these technologies at Elevance is not new. We've been at the forefront of innovation for the better part of a good decade now. And as with any sort of technology transformations at large companies, it kind of goes through several phases, right? So I'd say that as Gail, our CEO, came on board about 5 years ago, she placed a great degree of emphasis on let's try to adopt a digital first mindset at this company, which is she famously put it as let's give digital technologies the right of first refusal in solving our problems, whether it's
Yeah.
automating a process or it's creating the interactions, again with this notion that we want to emphasize the human to human interaction and personalize and simplify
Yep.
the consumer experience. So that sort of being our true north. I don't know if that there's ever going to be a time where we're going to say, yep, let's hang up our shoes and we're done here. I think there's always going to be the next thing to go solve. But the way in which we organized the work was to say, one, let's just kind of get more efficient. Let's apply AI to core sort of administrative processes that drive a lot of labor within our company. And as you'd imagine, those are things like adjudicating on prior authorizations or claims or doing underwriting or any of the other processes that comprise the value chain of a health plan. So a lot of time and effort was around, well, let's just go get after it and modernize and automate and use AI to make those things more efficient. And as we were starting to see the fruits of that labor, and we're able to then and make our company more efficient, we've been systematically reinvesting those efficiencies and improving our consumer experience. So, for example, during COVID, we launched a major initiative to bring digital and virtual care more effectively in a more integrated manner to our consumers. And a lot of that starts with a triage process that's very much a AI set of capabilities that interact with our consumers to understand what is actually the issue with that's causing them to reach out to a doc, and then triage that and give them options to text with a doc, email a doc, have a video visit, or schedule an appointment and see someone in person. But what that's doing is it's really providing the consumer with more information as to the symptoms they have and how it compares with everyone else that perhaps had similar symptoms, and then provide them with options on what to do next. And then for docs, it's giving them a lot more information on the triage so that they don't have to start with the normal questions of what happened, what's your family history, what's your drug history, what's your patient history.
Yep.
All of that's available at their fingertips. So then if you think about the progression here, which is automate the administrative processes, and then as enough of that is happening, sort of double down on improving the consumer experience by by providing better administrative experience, which we do via Sydney, our app, our portals, all of our
Mm,
digital channels like our voice assistants. But every one of those channels is infused with a set of personalization capabilities that are enabled by AI that anticipate what you might need and proactively, solve that. So that's kind of like, call it the step two of our journey. Step 2B was really around providing similar access to care through digital, virtual, and in-person care options by seamlessly integrating that. And then really the next level of maturity from there on is, a vast set of capabilities around anticipating what might happen in a person's healthcare journey and proactively using either digital or virtual or, in-person bricks and mortar options to resolve that proactively. It's almost like one of my colleagues, Omid Talui, uses this analogy of a check engine light in a car.
mm.
And if all the sensors and all the data that we have about ourselves could then ultimately light up a check engine somewhere,
Yeah.
then we could more proactively, address the issues of health, with our consumers and keep them healthy. That's kind of the ultimate true north for
It's
us.
very, very informative, and I think it kind of is from a notional perspective what technology can really make a difference in healthcare. And you got to move from this whole episodal point in time care of actually dealing with what's happening at the thing. We have to do that well, and we do a really good job of that across the entire industry. But turn that into preventative and more prescriptive care, like you just like it's a if you look at diseases like cancer, 70% of all cancers are preventable by with lifestyle changes. I mean, there's a lot of education and access kind of things that comes in there. But let me distill out the process that you actually use. And there's a couple of lessons that I learned from what you right now, which is important to call out. One is, we're not talking a 50 people shop that you're transforming. We're talking a company with 150 years of history, rich experiences, who are the masters of their game, and been driving transformation from different areas. So I'm pretty sure this doesn't go half as easy as actually you're making it sound right now. Number one, right? And I want to dive into that a little bit. But I think the best thing that I took away in that was like, look, taking that digital first mindset. How do you actually in I think James Clear talks about it in habit, the atomic habits, where and say you got to label yourself as something that you're not for you to become that something else that you're not, right? So that digital first mindset, hey, we're going to do it. That's our right of first refusal, is actually the digital first, right? So I think that's huge for anybody trying to even think about transforming a historic company. Second, I think I love the way the initial focus on the process, the administrative process that you did, that you focused on, shows another part of it, which is that's where you were really good at. So you knew that process inside out, right? Back to our earlier comment on making sure you know the data, knowing that it's actually how, like, heck, am I looking at the right thing? Is this what I'm supposed to be looking at? Is what I'm expecting? Is something wrong here? That comes in with the institutional experience you have, and then you focused on the area of strength that Elevance and at that time Anthem had. And it's the reason I call that out is there's a lot of digital transformations that are you hear enough case studies of things not to do, wherein a manufacturing company starts to do a digital platform for engaging suppliers, and then that was their first project, and it's like not really an area that you're good at, right? So don't try to do that, right? And then the other thing we didn't talk about much, but capability build up, right? Which is like, how do you build, you can't buy your way into AI or transformation, digital transformation in general. You got to build it as a part of your institutional muscle, capability set, and so forth. And then like this gradual process of saying, as you start solving problems that are meeting business goals, and the investment is paying out, and you're getting broader adoption and agreement and alignment. And I think in your book you talk about the example of someone on a member care floor. You show them how digital technologies can make their life easier, like their workflows easier, and that immediate light bulb goes on in their head, and all of a sudden they're a big champion. It's very true about large scale organizational transformations, about people first, right? So talk a little bit about people and organizational, right? What kind of constructs you need to actually focus on, and then capabilities, right? What does that mean to actually building the organizational muscle in being able to drive these kind of transformations?
Yeah, and I think great points. Ganesh, I think maybe if I start with the second part of your question first,
Sure.
the capability that's needed. I think frequently people sort of assume that you were just directly referencing the talent around core AI, machine learning and data science kind of skills, and the more of the core of the technology skills. And of course, that's important. And we spend a lot of time, recruiting, curating, and finding that talent, and going to where the talent exists in cities like Austin, Chicago, Palo Alto,
Yeah.
Boston, and globally in places like Ireland, Israel, India. And so that continues to be kind of a major source of where we spend our time, is to find and curate and grow that talent. But it's not just that.
Mm.
It's also data engineering. It's data subject matter expertise. It's process expertise. It's skills like Lean Six Sigma, which have been around for a while,
Yep.
and it's moving everyone collectively. It's moving our physicians. It's moving our care managers. It's moving our customer service advocates and the engineering teams together with a common purpose. And fortunately, our purpose is very compelling and clear, which is we've got
Yep.
just one thing in our minds when we wake up, which is how do we improve the lives of our consumers that we serve? Ultimately, how do we improve the lives of humanity and the health of humanity? So, a workforce that's 100,000 strong that wakes up with that common purpose, there's an immense amount of power to that. But there's also challenges, right? Which is because every technology kind of has breathlessly makes the same claims about transformation and simplification, and how it fundamentally disrupts everything. And then some have worked and some haven't. So there's a natural amount
Yep.
of skepticism about, is this really another thing that's going to fizzle out, and is this something that we should be betting on? And also near term versus long term ones.
Mm-hmm.
Frequently, I think we make the mistake, as you were citing in your example, in the manufacturer's case of going after a supply chain platform. Those are very ambitious projects, which nothing wrong with it, except they have a high risk of failure and typically have a longer timeline to succeed. So you almost have to have a portfolio based approach where there's enough short term wins, near term things that are relevant for our business and our operational leaders, that's making their lives better. So then if you're doing that, then you're able to create a little bit of the power of the pull,
Mm.
which my former colleague from Deloitte, John Hagel, famously wrote about, which is there's push and pull. So as technologists, we often have to push a point of view on why tech can solve a certain problem.
Yep.
But then ultimately, the power of pull is if the consumers of that are P&L leaders, or operational leaders, other C-suite executives at companies are saying, "No, I need that. I want to have a digital first mindset. Well, show me how to do that." And that power of pull ultimately drives scale more quickly. And there's no sort of secret formula to saying, where do you reach that tipping point, but you have to work towards that to say now the demand for these technologies sort of far exceeds the supply, and you're keeping pace with kind of what the business is demanding of you. And that's the trick to this, which is you can quickly get enamored by the shiny object, and for a while everyone loves it, but then if it's not producing results and moving the core operational metrics of a company, people just get disenfranchised with it and ultimately lose faith that it could work. So I think it's almost like thinking ahead to that point of failure and going through the uncertainties in a systematic manner within a big company like ours to move everyone together, so that we're kind of achieving our goals together. That's kind of both the art and the science of a transformation.
Yeah.
No perfect formula for making it work,
Well,
but it's got to be business led and business embedded for it to succeed.
no, it's a master class in that, and it was a short, compressed version of it. But a lot of different things to take away there, right? But I think I love how you also mentioned about the whole notion. You got to get the hardest part in all is actually getting everybody together, and you got to think about it from a portfolio approach, the push and pull mentality, saying there's a time in which you can create SWAT teams to go push, but then you want to get mass scale adoption. You got to flip the thing and say make it more pull. So then that becomes prioritizing a portfolio of capabilities that'll move the needle, engage people, and make a difference in their lives. So it becomes a demand rather than just a high degree of supply. This is awesome, Rajiv. My last question to you is: what are still some of the problems that are unsolved that you're focused on right now? It's mostly for a call to the innovators out here who's listening in.
I think in healthcare in the US in particular, Ganesh, I think the fragmentation of the user experience is still a huge issue. So, for instance, an Elevance consumer that, let's say, accesses care and service capabilities via any of our digital assets or through one of our contact centers likely has a decent experience.
Yep.
But when that experience, goes from there to a hospital, perhaps they also have a great experience there. But then let's say you go to your primary care physician and perhaps you have a very long history with that primary care physician. The issue is that those three things exist in silos. We aren't able
Yeah.
to effectively control the connected dots across what should be a primary care visit, being referred to a specialist, perhaps a prescription being refilled, to having an administrative question about what's covered by my benefits, how should I use my HSA account, for example, to pay it or not. Uh, all of those things tend to get answered in silos, thus kind of creating this frustrating experience in the aggregate for our consumers. Which, while any one experience may be okay, the aggregate is always something that leaves much to be desired.
Mm.
And so I think the big challenge for us going forward in the next kind of 2 to 3 years is how do we simplify that experience so that the same delightful experience you have while shopping for things on Amazon, for example, could be then replicated in healthcare, where the multiple disparate experiences that comprise of the average experience can then have a common facade that's personalized,
Yeah.
delightful, simple to use, and always surfaces and emphasizes the human to human interaction wherever possible. I don't think we've cracked the nut on that. And once that we break through that, I'm very optimistic that that can happen. Then imagine all the longitudinal insights we have about every interaction, how it then can improve the quality of care, reduce medical errors, make physicians more effective, reduce their burnout, and ultimately want to have consumers really engaged in their own health. Because today, people care about peripherally, or when there's an issue, of course, there's an acute focus, and I got to get better. But every other time when you're relatively well, you don't think about it. Like, so how do we make sure that there's ongoing engagement to keep people that are healthy, and then people that are either kind of transitioning into being chronically ill or acutely ill or have an issue, that we're able to anticipate those needs and then bring them back together. So exciting, sort of set of challenges ahead for sure, in being able to solve it with all of the constraints that we have in our industry, but one that I'm very optimistic that we can absolutely solve together.
Sure. I love that too, because the today we're brute forcing to solve that, which is like, how do I look at the data, build the insight, build the longitudinal record, and then go say, let's go do it. But if you bring the consumer into the ecosystem and deliver it through the way you deliver the experience, make them be a participant in the process, unlocks a lot of value. Rajiv, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for spending the time. Last question: where can the listeners and viewers find you on the internet? How can they find you on the internet?
I'm on LinkedIn at Rajeev Ronanki, also Twitter at Rajeev Ronanki. So both of those channels are quite active, and look forward to engaging your audience on those channels, as well as thank you for having me. It was a delightful conversation, Ganesh.
Thank you, Rajiv. It was a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.